combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in this beautiful blue planet. Wow, what a week difference makes. And you could go through all the memes and the tropes through the week of the idiocy of the non-commonsensical on display across the planet as the norm. Well, what about the intensifying electromagnetic field changes that have just, in my opinion, caused the earthquakes in Turkey? Now, hear me out for a second. Do you remember January 15th, 2022? What occurred then? The largest eruption in the last 200 years, Hunga Tonga, in a single event, adding 10% of water vapor to our atmosphere. In a single day, we added 10% more moisture to the atmosphere. A lot of that went up into the mesosphere, created ice crystal clouds, which are now in the process of breaking down ozone at a rate that is just so unbelievable, exponential, comparatively to anything of what those chlorofluorocarbons had done. And then we have this series of quakes. So is it the magnetic window that we're starting to approach and pass through as we get to the date of October of 2024 when the four gas giants in the outer solar system square up visually from our planet? The last time that happened was 79 AD. And we're supposed to believe that the world you see around you is somehow just random. When we're coming into a once in a 2,000-year cycle electromagnetically, and the changes are now so visible and taking a toll on NPC players out there that have human form. These electromagnetic frequency changes the way perceptions, reality is different. It seems like it's bent. It does. So Ransom, I'm glad you're joining me because I'm looking at a picture of Roman Colosseum with at least 20 feet of mud up in the one side there, and even in the arches, just mud streets and people trying to clear away some of the dirt, having a picnic on the grasses that had grown. So obviously it had been quite a while that the mud had rolled up onto the Colosseum. This is a lithograph from the early 1798. So a lot of directions to take the show. Are we about to repeat another lost chapter of civilization because of global liquefaction or some sort of electromagnetic-induced megaquakes and volcanic eruptions, land subsidence? I'm not sure, man. But I'm glad you're here tonight to talk about it.
Let's hope that's not the case, because that's kind of what I was wanting to talk about, like the possibility of us having the worst year ever and what that would actually mean in like today's civilization, because a lot of people don't know that there was like a whole line of events about 1,500 years ago that just put a stop to everything worldwide. Also, we talk about cycles, but the cycles are even smaller than that because, we keep talking about resets. Let's talk about the one 1,500 years ago. And there's theories that a chunk of Halley's Comet just flew off or smacked into Earth somewhere, or at least the dust of it exploding in the atmosphere, started a weird chain of events in like 536 AD, right? So you got the Byzantine Empire going, and everything's kind of rolling on track. And then all of a sudden it gets dark, right? It gets so dark that people are thinking that it's the end of the world. 18 months of darkness, like only 4 hours of sun a day. And people are freaking out because the fruit's not ripening and the grains aren't growing. And, all of this stuff's happening. Now, they didn't know what was going on worldwide, but now in retrospect, we know that there was a big line of natural disasters that was just befalling Earth that flipped the entire way of human civilization on the entire globe upside down, and it had to change. And it all happened within maybe 2 years. The damage was done, and it took decades, if not hundreds of years, to recuperate in some places. We call these times the Dark Ages. Literally, it was dark. But yeah, some trippy stuff was going on. Like around 535, they think a volcano exploded in El Salvador, and then most likely one in North America, somewhere in Mexico, popped its top. And then you have the ones in Iceland; they're popping their tops off too. And there was already supposedly this weird yellow dust that was falling down in different places around the world. Fog in Europe, yellow dust in China. And so, I was thinking there's a lot of history that's tied into that story about what was going on with the, Justinian plague and all of the stuff that happened right after 536 when all of these volcanoes, basically simultaneously go off in a short period of time, probably a decade altogether. Because we know there was some kind of event in Iceland in about 536, and then again in 540, and then 547. So you're getting this increasing number of particles just being put up in the atmosphere, and it's going dark everywhere, and it's getting cold. Worldwide temperatures were dropping like 30 degrees Fahrenheit. You got crop scarcity, crop failure. Ireland's having its bread failure, and it just made me think, well, what were they doing around the world, right? So I'm looking into South America. You got the in Peru, the Mochi civilization. All of a sudden, their waters changed because they had this weird El Nino that came in, probably something to do with the other weather patterns that were happening, making everything dark. And then you get a bunch of dead fish, so it's freaking them out, and then their crops are failing too. And then you go north a little bit, and the same thing's happening. This is exactly when everybody left the cities in the Mayan Empire. They're having, the same thing: crop scarcity, no food, it's dark. The weather patterns are all messed up, and we're talking just within a few years after a couple of events. So not something that's out of the imagination to happen to us. You brought up the Tonga explosion. If that, just imagine just a couple of those and some of those land based, how fast things would change. A lot of weird stuff was happening, like over in China. The same thing was happening there. They were having frost in summer in 537 AD and 538 ish. The Chinese in some cities were losing like 80% of their population over a 2-year period because there was literally nothing to eat. And they had the same descriptions at the time as this weird yellow dust or fog started coming down on them, and they didn't know where it was coming from. So there was all kinds of stuff going worldwide. But it wasn't all negative, I don't think, because over here in the Americas, or at least North America, I mean, you get the rise of like the Kiva buildings and Chaco Canyons and things like that. So over here, all of a sudden, hunter-gatherers changed their way that they lived, and then they started upgrading with new tech, new farming techniques, new food, and they created a new civilization out of that dark period. So, when we're talking about today's times, it's any number of things that can change fundamentally the dynamics of how humans live in this civilization. And I know we talk a lot about the elites doing this and them doing that and their plans, war, famine, disease. It's all the same things that were happening in, what a lot of historians are calling the worst year ever as far as in human history, because everywhere in the world was having bad times. Now, this can't be the only time, but it's a well-documented time in all of the cultures pretty much in the four corners of the earth. We're all having issues all of the sudden because of a massive change in temperature, light, and the standard of living took a nosedive. So we're talking, 80% of the population probably in most places happened strictly from disease and starvation, just because there wasn't no food, because food production stopped. So when you equate that to what's going on right now, we know that there's an artificial increase in the speed in which food becomes scarce in our world. Now, if you could imagine a couple of these natural disasters that you were talking about, volcanoes, global liquefaction, different, there's all kinds of theories out there. But we know a lot of these things, they happen. They happen so often that the odds on them not happening are almost nothing, because we know stuff hits the earth. Volcanoes burp every so often. There's massive earthquakes like you were talking about. And they got 20,000 people just dead over pretty much overnight right there in Turkey. Now, imagine these things just happening on a global scale with no food growing at the same time. So, in your opinion, is it possible that we could relive, or not relive because none of us lived in it, but at least human beings re-experience the worst year ever? Like, how bad could it get with just a few incidents of natural disasters in a row? So the theory is, there were all of these volcanoes popping off because they know from the ice core samples and glaciers that they checked, they found all of this dust from South America, North America, and also some cosmogenic, out of the atmosphere material. So that we pretty much know something popped into the earth right about 536, and all of these volcanoes went off. So do you think they were tied together, or just coincidentally a series of bad things kind of happen around the world? What's your thought on that? Because we're talking about a smaller global annihilation of civilization, basically, because around the world, everybody got restarted in basically a decade. And then bad things just started happening for decades after that.
Yeah, I can add a little bit to your 535 AD. I've done a bit of study about that period of time as well, because it was the largest amount of volcanic eruptions that had disrupted the air column itself. So the accounts I read, all the way from Rome down into Athens and Greece at that time, and even over into what we now know as Turkey and Istanbul. Speaking of that, they talked about the air being poison, where there was so much sulfur dioxide in the air from a never-ending emission of like just mass amounts of gas. They think it might have been Mount Laki, because Mount Laki also erupted in the 1790s and sent a huge amount of disruption into crop production over Europe, but that was more localized. It wasn't nearly as large as particularly this event here. It was like a never-ending outgassing. So sometimes you might think of an eruption as, boom, lava coming out, but think of it a gaseous release for months on end. Because think about how thick the crust is. They're talking going down 300 to 400 miles, and then encompassing the entire crust of the planet. Now, if electromagnetically something were to shift and crustal layers were, let's say, compressed on each other, then pockets of gases, etc., would squeeze out through the easiest path of least resistance, which would be a volcano. Now, another thing that this is also interesting, while you were talking, Ransom, I went to solarsystemscope.com, and when I first did this research, this had to have been back in like 2014, 15, Solar System Scope would allow you to go back about 2,500 years into the past. So you could see the planetary orbits, or they call it planetary geometry, like where is each planet in its orbit at a certain year, or a certain month, or a certain day in a year. It's just software. And it used to be able to run way back, and it would get kind of murky at 2,500 years ago in their model. But now you can't go back that far anymore. You can go back like 100 years. So they updated it so you can only go back 100 years or so. But I pulled that 535, 36, 37 planetary geometry out of this data set way back then, looking for, here's the catalyst for everybody, here's the catalyst. And anybody can do this research. It's not rocket science once you understand the formula. You'll know what to look for. And once you know what to look for, and when you see it, you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe they don't know about this. Powers that be, governments, etc. Once you see the pattern, all you have to do is look back in history, and you'll start to see the disruptions associated with the pattern in the skies, in the heavens. It's the orbits of the planets around us. So the four gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, all line up super, super close in one quadrant of the sky. So if you were looking from the Earth directly out to the planets, it would look like they were in a square from the perspective of Earth in the outer solar system. This is coming up to almost a perfect square in 2024 October. Now, the last time I found this perfect square configuration was 79 AD. But with that said, I rolled through that 535 set also. They are exactly the same. The four gas giants are in one quadrant of the solar system, although they're not making a perfect square. They're making more of a little bit of parallelogram, if that's a descriptor there. They're just off center of a rectangle, but not really squarish rectangle, sort of going toward the diamondish shape. But same rules. They're all in one quadrant of the solar system. So when you're looking from the Earth, it would look very much like they were in a square. And once you start to see that, go to the Maunder minimum, 1640, you'll see it again. You'll see it around 1100. And it's a 10-year cycle. We're leading into this for 4 years. You hit the onset, the heaviest magnetic field changes. And then, those planets start to circulate back out again. And then we come back into some sort of magnetic equilibrium. But that transit from where we sit today until we come out of it, 535 would be a very scary period of time to be around. I did some study about that in Japan because there's temples devoted to the fox up there. And you might think, well, there's no celestial fox. Yes, there is, but you need to go back prehistory to find it. Circa past 12,000 years prior into what we consider constellations as we know them today with Sagittarius and Virgo and Libra and all these. One cycle ago, there was actually a constellation represented as the fox. So in some temples, this tradition has been carried down that many thousands, over 10,000 years into the temple of the fox. And you can't bring money. They don't want money. They want food. You have to bring food as the offering, which I find really interesting also. But the whole reason I even got into looking for the temple of the fox, I stumbled onto that one. It was going through the rice famines there and the different kind of shoguns that would take over areas and how they formed alliances to be able to control food and pillage food to make sure that their kingdoms / fiefdoms were working together to try to stave off. Korea experienced the same thing. China also. Definitely a global event. And as you said, the Mayans were starting to get hit with that in the beginning. By 800 AD, they never really recovered from that. And then that was the classical story that we understand from now as how the conquistadors rocked up there and said, give me all the gold. Well, they were on the decline way before then because of this same event. So the classical history says conquistadors rocked up over into the Mayan kingdom, the Aztec kingdoms. And it was a fully functioning thing. So you think it's like at the apex of its society, like we were just a few years ago. But really it wasn't. It was just a shell of its former self after this 535 AD event. Multiple volcanoes across the planet. Not only was it the ash, but it apparently, after reading some papers, it seems that it was a nonstop gas emission out of the volcanoes versus what you consider hard rock and lava. It was a degassing event, and it covered the planet. They talk about the air being poison, the lung diseases that came along there, the crops, their eyes would burn every time it rained. Obviously, acid rain. You ever been around a volcano? I have. Many a time. I go up to the vents, and there's like these really cool sulfur crystals growing out, and where do you think hot springs are at? And there's volcanoes that are out, maybe not going into the lava, but with the steam vents for sure, all around volcanoes at the steam vents. Love the sound, super ferocious sound, and just watching the crystals grow out of that, crazy stuff. That kind of eruption at the uber of a VEI-8 of just pure gas coming out for months on end. I don't know what the trigger for it was, but there's a lot of things that really line up to today. First would be we're coming back into the four gas giants lining up in one quadrant of the solar system. Secondly, we're starting to get the bigger quakes. Like, you can't tell me the footage that you saw from Turkey was really a 7.6 earthquake. That for me is so far unbelievable that they had over 5,600 buildings collapse, and you're supposed to believe it was just a moderate to big 7.5 earthquake. That thing was way well into the 8.0. But you got to realize the quakes are going to continue to intensify in magnitude as we roll around and can reconnect and disconnect with this new magnetic anomaly in the outer solar system. See, the timelines are already set for how the Earth's going to swing around in its orbit and how it's going to get locked in this. Again, I'm going to call it second magnetic field, magnetic anomaly, magnetic perturbation, whatever it is. Our magnetic field's waning, the sun's stepping down, and we got a new field forming in the outer solar system. And somehow the mechanics between all those three are really starting to show in the crust. So now, somewhere around September 23rd, now, I'll leave you with a thought here, Ransom, because I don't know if we're truly going to get the true magnitude of earthquakes any longer, because some of the video footage that I saw of the rolling earth, like literally a rolling wave, and also some shocks up and down in a rolling wave of 30 feet. I mean, there was just some unbelievable footage. You cannot in your right mind tell me that was under a 7 earthquake. That was the most ferocious earth moving that I've ever seen in my life, ever. And I watch a ton of those videos. I like to see how the earth's moving. I feel terrible for the people that are in the event, but the way that nature can go so much more magnitude than we could possibly imagine. Like, really, even in the last 100 years or so, we've seen nothing in comparison to what the earth can throw at us. Literally nothing. We are in one of the calmest periods in the last 10,000 years, geologically and climate-wise, than we ever have been. And that seems to be right on the cusp of changing. And you know what, Ransom? A lot of people know it. They're just not telling the general public. And I will say, based on the magnetic research and the magnetic anomaly and where the Earth's going to transit through, I would call an 8.0 earthquake or bigger in a window of maybe September 23rd up to like November 15th. Somewhere in that, 45, 50-day window, you're going to expect 1 or 2 8.0 earthquakes, because we are going to swing around and be close to the very edge of it at Jupiter when that new magnetic anomaly is onsetting. So you can't tell me. You talk about 3 things, and I'm saying these 3 things match up with my research, and you're talking about 535 AD. So something's going on. Who knows, and why aren't they telling the populace?
Yeah, it was a really trip looking through all of that stuff and like refreshing my history on that. And I didn't even realize that separate things I knew were the same year for some reason. Like it didn't click in my head. But you can see that all of the civilizations on Earth were changed within just like 2 years. And whether it was a comet or all of these volcanoes within the same span of like 3 years going off all around the Earth, what was the trigger? I don't know, but I was trying to think about it in a modern terms, and I'm thinking about all of these Mayans, and the evidence is that they were leaving the cities right then in 536 to 537. They were just bouncing. They weren't at war. This is something that a lot of people think, well, there was probably war and this and that. There's not really evidence of war, because when you go to these temple complexes out in the jungle, they're not finding a bunch of points and arrows and staffs and stuff like that. They're not finding dead bodies that are wedged between the rocks. None of that kind of stuff. It's more like they just got up and left. And with my states, I know that at the same time is when the kind of Kiva Anasazi civilization started building a lot of their buildings. And the genetic remains of some of the bodies that they found, like, say, Chaco Canyon. We know that there was Mayan DNA, Aztec DNA, so they were coming all the way up into North America. Who knows, scavenging, because there's a lot of evidence that all of the cities that were in the Yucatan, they just left because whatever bad conditions were happening there at the same years. And we know what was happening in Europe. It was dark, nothing was growing. There was some kind of weird fog or mist everywhere. You have plague running rampant, and everybody's malnourished. And the onset of this is just 2 years, and then into you get into the Justinian plague, and what happens then? We're talking about civilizations falling apart, because the whole Roman Empire was, they had uprisings and all of these other things started about then. Everybody was falling apart everywhere. And then when you look into China, so you know that in China, they were having bad times in their cities too. It's estimated they probably in Europe alone, like around the Roman Empire, they lost 50 million people. And then they think there was probably about an 80% population reduction in China at the same time, with these severe winters that they started getting all of a sudden, where they talk about ice storms and frost in the summer and spring that they just weren't expecting. So something, planetary in size, it doesn't seem like it's that big or an event as far as the Earth chugging along through history. But us people that live on it, our whole environment, our whole civilization can change obviously fast. Now, think about this in the modern terms, because you got all of these Mayan families, and there's a lot of evidence to support that there was a big middle class in the Mayan jungle. So we're not just talking about lords, up on the hill with their temple. We're talking about a lot of construction, a lot of building, roads, commerce. So we know there was a little bit of a middle class going on, similar to what you would think about as the United States has a big middle class. It's been shrinking. So they had a middle class, and then all of a sudden, everybody just got up and left. They didn't want to live in the city, or they couldn't sustain the city, whatever the case is. Now, if you fast forward to our times and kind of empathize on what was going on, I bet you would realize the same exact thing would happen now. So you got Chicago, Detroit, New York. I mean, you name the city, the power goes out for one reason or another. The food stops coming for one reason or another. Say there's several volcanoes go off again in our lifetime, and there's really little to no sun getting to the ground, and crops are failing, governments are hoarding. It wouldn't be long before people started mass migrating out of the metropolises trying to get away, right? And then at the same time, in real world, our time, you have these governments and elites planning on everyone living in these little 5-minute, 15-minute zones where they can be locked down at a moment's notice, and they don't really want them out into the Earth's biosphere. In other words, they don't like the idea of a natural living man just being able to change the way they live and start living in nature, because it seems to be that's exactly what they did in the Southwest, as far as they went from more of a hunter-gatherer type bands of groups of people, and they started building cities, and they started trying to farm new plants, and they started using new technology. Now, that might have been because all of these civilizations in the Americas were on the other end of collapse. So there was people coming up from Mexico into North America, probably wanting to trade and find new seeds or find new ways to start growing things. So a whole new civilization kind of started over here. And then you also see in the ice records that everything was bad for decades and decades. And then all of a sudden you can tell, because of the lead in the ice, that people started making silver coins again. And then all of a sudden you see the rebound of the reset, so to speak, where people started, having commerce again and growing plants again. And it took several decades in some places, and even centuries in other places after the collapses of their civilization.
Yeah, it's not going to be an easy rebuilding process now, is it? So the whole reason, Ransom and I are doing the show is it's great to be prepped out and have your storable foods and that sort of thing. That'll at least buy you some time to assess the situation, to figure out that you are going to need to replenish those supplies. And I'm not talking about going back to the store and getting it, because at that point, there won't be stores that, as we understand them, any longer. It's going to be a little bit of time. Can you imagine if there's a currency problem? If the BRICS nations take off, I just saw Italy joined, or I'm sorry, not Italy, Egypt just joined the BRICS. What happens if the value of the money is not accepted across the planet, and 50% of the planet does not accept the US dollar? Well, that would create a huge problem. What if 25% of the planet said, no, we only take the gold-backed currency, we don't want any US dollars? Whoever has the energy and the resources is going to be able to call the shots. So it is going to take a little while to build up, but because it is a planetary event, it's not as if one set of countries will be unaffected. Because I was looking at what happened in New Zealand, for example. They had the biggest floods they've ever had recorded ever, and now they have a cyclone heading down there. You have to realize that the rain records that were broken were something like 12 to 15x over the previous oldest record ever recorded in New Zealand. Now, they're going with more Western records versus Maori, and, they discount Maori legends and stories of creation, etc. But if you follow that, let's say 12x above the normal all-time. Let's say the biggest amount of rainfall they've ever had in a single day ever. This storm a few days back was 12 times higher than that. But that still pales in comparison to Maori stories of what happens when the planet turns over, and the catalyst leading up to it, and the electrical effects, and they talk about what might be described as plasma dragons and plasma displays and ancients in the skies. I mean, how would you really describe that? You see a squatter man or a different kind of thing popping back in the sky there. That's a hard one to explain, even for me to try to explain to somebody else. Or is it higher energized? Atoms are bouncing around up there. Oh, wait, there's a tube. There's this intertwined current up there. You can't really see it, but that's the reason the plasma can hold state, is wrapping around a field line of current, and the atoms are bouncing, and it's all more electrified, and it's really, try to explain that to your next door neighbor. Like, what? Yeah, okay. I see it, but I still think you got two heads because you can describe it. That's the kind of world that it'll lead into. But anyway, I digress. I was looking for this. I had a story pulled up about Iran, China, and Russia have started a new payment system that is going around SWIFT. It's an alternative to SWIFT. They've already had like 31 other countries join it just days after it launched here. And I had it poised up for a story, and somehow I got lost in too many windows open. You know how that happens. But I think it might, if I can find it again here. Yeah, and then we got cargo thefts are spiking, and I'm sure people have seen that around in the news. Cargo thefts spiking across the U.S. and pretty much every single other place across the world. So now the thieving is starting, okay? This is where the rubber meets the road. Now that the thefts are starting because people are getting pushed into the corner, this follows another very clean chapter of history of when people can't get it, they start stealing, and then the governments make more draconian or, laws that are far above. They used to hang people for stealing like a loaf of bread, and then people go watch it. Oh, no, it's for pickpocketing, excuse me. Pickpocketing in France after the famines was punishable by death by hanging. And then while they were hanging the thieves for stealing, pickpocketing, people in the crowd were being pickpocketed because that's where the pickpockets knew everybody would be distracted by looking at the people being hung, so they could go through and pick their pockets more easily. So you see the weirdness in that whole thing. And that was France, 1700s, after their famine. So it comes down to the theft first. And we've seen some repeats in Venezuela where, you saw the footage of people blocking a chicken truck in the middle of the highway. And then when it came to a stop, like 100 plus people running up onto the truck and just ripping those crates of chickens down. And they stripped that full truck of like 5,000 chickens in under 5 minutes. That's crazy. These are the kind of things. And then you got to wonder about the grain deliveries, this theft. And see, they keep pointing to cargo theft out of trains and these sort of things as the theft. So what I imagine is this just is going to fall right into line to have more security on the trains, because most of the food is delivered by rail. So they're going to need an excuse to put more police or armed whatever onto the trains. And then we're rolling right back into the pioneering lifestyle 1850s. You got armed guards on the trains to deliver whatever resources to a place. Come on. That's taking us back in time, not forward. But the thieving is starting. 15% increase in that targeted electronics and these types of things that are on the supply chain that are more difficult to come by, I guess. So how would you know that the changes are here? Well, let's look down to Africa for a second. I had a friend of mine who works in the dairy industry, and we were talking, and he said, "Did you hear about African food crisis?" And I said, "Not really. I've sort of looked at it last month for one of the reports I did on the opportunity cycle report." And he's like, you're not going to believe this. Just in like the last 30 days or so, African food crisis is exponentially increased to the point now where it's the biggest yet, the biggest ever. And I'm thinking, did you just say the biggest ever food crisis in Africa just kind of came out of the woodwork in the last 30 days? Like, how is that possible? Oh, the collapse of the Nigerian economy because they wanted everybody to turn in their old bills to get the new bills. But none of the banks would issue the new bills, so everybody's stuck with their old money, and they can't get any out of the ATMs. Yet those that know bank employees are able to actually walk in through the side entrance and get new stacks of the new notes, while the commoners are stuck waiting for empty ATM machines and not being able to cash in their paper currency. So now they're starting riots everywhere. They're figuring it out. Like, oh, you're going to wait until my currency comes back on live, and then you're going to have that bozo that just took 2 backpacks full of money out come and say, hey, give me your old money and I'll give you 2 cents on the dollar. And then there'll be like a grace period of 30 days and they'll go cash it at full value. Excuse me. They understand exactly what's happening over there with their money. So wherever you look, I mean, there's so many signs out here. You can't even not see them anymore. Like, what's this distraction about Africa's largest food crisis ever just started? Like, what kind of distraction will that give us on the planet? Or will it be an awakening point to people understand that food is not even able to be grown with all the support and all the new tech and all the development projects and all the World Bank loans and yada, 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 and they still can't grow food in Africa? Like, what is going on? Trillions of dollars invested in there and they still can't grow food? Like, whoa, hold on a second. Is it an eye-opener? I don't know. Just pointing to more signs there, Ransom. And I was going to say something, but I forgot my thought. Please continue.
Well, maybe they'll just shrink the amount of stuff going out on the cargo boxes, because that's I was showing them an article about that right when you said that, which is funny, is because it was talking about how all of the shipping is going to decrease because they're cutting back. They're cutting back because the economy is cutting back. Because why? They got so many reasons in the pipeline right now, and they're really, we've been covering how they chip away at the resources available to the public. And I've been watching that, especially with this, those articles I sent you about how they're even cutting back on canning foods because they have an aluminum shortage because of war or whatever. But when you just look through the headlines, they're telling you that they're just getting ready for more rounds of more reasons why you can't have stuff, why there's no food. And they're doing it so incrementally that it's just going to be one day everybody's going to wake up and they're going to go to the store and there's just nothing going to be there, and they're going to have to fight over what it is, and everybody's going to be crying, and the government will probably at that point say, don't worry about it. We have this new voucher program or, ration program. But they're saying, you know what, you can't have chickens, you can't have eggs, you can't have pet food. And then what happens too, whenever they keep saying that, well, we just don't have enough of these products to make the pet food. So, the public's going to have to pick their pets or them whenever they're eating, right? Because the food has to go somewhere. So I already see that weird stuff happening. And then you got people like, Bill Gates, and then you got people at the Davos talking about how it's probably a good idea that the Western world kill all of their pets off to save the environment. And then backdrop, you got them steadily threatening, that the bird flu is going to leap. I saw an article the other day that said the ferrets had it, so they're worried about, it jumping from the ferrets to the humans, and then us having another big problem. But that's why you can't have pet food. And then, like you said, and you could look in the microscope at different places having all of their own little or big emergencies, depending on if you live there or you're looking at it through the lens of the news. But just looking at that earthquake, yeah, I was watching footage of that. You got all these buildings collapsed. And and it makes me think of the technology that they have and they don't share in the right ways. Like I did a video one time about the drones that they fly up and the high altitude balloons that are over the cities, and how they can keep a high definition image of every single car and every single person that's walking around, and the computer puts a little box on them, keeps track of them, keeps the timestamp. So if you want to know what happened on the corner of First Street and the Constitution, say at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you could punch that in there and they could look at what happened. So there's really no excuse why crimes go unsolved, why people get abducted, or think about this. You got all of these phone companies constantly tracking your whereabouts, and if your phone's on or off, you got all of this information, all of this data gathering. But when an earthquake happens, they don't go, you know what, there's 40 people in that, or we're using their phone in that building, so there's probably 40 people in there. You should probably go look for them right there. Instead, we still do this like 1920 style, move the rubble and see if we can find victims thing. So like within an hour, the technology that exists, they could have an accounting of where everybody was, when their phones were active, where they were, if the phone stopped at a certain area. So they would know each building, how many people were, estimate of how many people were in there. But we don't use technology for these reasons. And the reason is because we're in the culling period here. So 20,000 just from a quake. They're not really getting any help from anywhere. And then you got to go into, like I said, this thing, cargo imports expected to see a big drop as retailers take cautious stance, worried about probably what you were talking about and not what this article says, which is the economic worries in this article. But then you were talking about the thefts going up, so that may factor into that. And then, they're scaring everybody, telling them it's stroke season, heart attack season, cancer season. And, you're more and more people, for some amazing reason, are getting cancers in their 30s and 40s, according to CNN. They don't know why. Biden acts like he really doesn't understand that the rest of the world sees us in World War III already. They're talking about political assassinations, rolling tanks in. I mean, they're giving numbers. We're trying to give them pilots over there. Talking about in Germany, they're returning of conscription. So it sounds like they're about to pull the draft out in several places. And then you got the wars between the corporations and the billionaires going along with this, like Elon Musk cutting his internet to the Ukraine's military. And it just rolls into this new system that they're doing. So they're trying a complete eradication of systems, cities. And if you've seen some of the video coming out of Ukraine about what's actually going on the ground, you can see that first world country type cities are just flattened. There's nothing there. There's just rubble. So it's kind of amazing. But don't forget that you could just pop up some crops there in a few years, even though all of those buildings are gone. Everybody's going to the AI war. Basically, China gears up to shoot down U.S. drones. Obviously, they sent a big balloon over here that had technology on it, probably to steal everybody's private and commercial information from coast to coast. And then, well, don't worry about it. We blew it up when it finally got out in the ocean there. And then Iranian drones appear to contain modified explosives designed for maximum damage in Ukraine. So they're increasing the amount of killing power. Then you got the war of the AIs going on, the Pentagon using Chat GPT, and then you got Alibaba building their own AI to compete with Chat GPT. So the increased change of reality, in your opinion, of stuff. And now the Pentagon also admits that they're, using Chat GPT to write their announcements, their speeches, their reports, and it's beginning to be scary who is running things. China's reacts to this guy Blinken coming over there saying, we didn't even know he was coming. We don't care. They're and then people are losing their minds all over the place as we're still debating how to connect everyone to this new internet system. And this is more of the war of the corporations, because they're fighting over which one of them can put a chip in your head fastest. So now they're saying, Elon Musk might have started some plagues over here in the U.S. by bringing monkeys, but don't worry about it. I wanted to get your reaction from this because, with all of that going on, in the background, some of these companies like Rolls-Royce are trying to make you believe in a fantasy world where you can just fly away in your nuclear car, and go to Mars and look at what's going on, go to the moon and, yada, yada, because they have a mini micro nuclear reactor and they want you to, obviously that's science fiction. Meanwhile, on Earth, I'm sure you saw what happened in Mount Washington where the temperatures were dropping down like if it was in the Antarctic. Record-breaking cold all over the place. New England got their record-breaking cold. And then, we're killing off tens of thousands of people at a time by sending them into this conflict zone, now spreading in Europe. EU to train 30,000 more Ukrainian troops because they keep dying. UK Defense Secretary not ruling out delivery of military aircraft to Ukraine at the same time as they're saying they're out of ammunition in all of the European countries for some reason. It's just weird that they're doing that. And then meanwhile in the U.S., cities along the border are basically claiming they're in collapse. Hospitals are wanting to close because, they're getting millions and millions of dollars of unexpected costs from people that have crossed the border and are using services. They're calling it not sustainable. The hospital's on the brink of collapse. So it's all around the world, just like we were saying. Is it the worst year yet again? I don't think so until we get some big things like some more volcanoes up in the sky. But then you have scientists talking about, well, let's just blow up some of the moon and then we can put some moon dust, in between us and the sun. And then you got Bill Gates talking about, no, we can pump sulfur in the atmosphere and we can do all of these things to create a artificial 536 AD. What do you think about that? I mean, and, the scientist that gene edited the babies decided maybe he acted too quickly. Oops. We're sorry about that. And then in the backdrop, are you ready to lose your power? Because somebody somewhere is attacking the grid infrastructure in 4 states now. And if you haven't noticed, all of the factories going up in flames all over the planet, all of the production of humankind seems to be coming to a halt. So it kind of takes you back 1,500 years here. Civilization is slowly coming to a stop. And although it might not be dark times as far as limited light from the sun yet, it seems like it's already dark times as far as behavior and the restructuring of global civilization. It's kind of hard to doubt that. So, yeah, that's what's happening as far as I see it.
I'm not worried about the monkeys, man. Not worried about the monkeys. Bigger things to worry about, like Mount Washington, for example. Now, for those of you who hadn't heard the story, thanks for Ransom for bringing that up. It's the coldest wind chill ever recorded anywhere in America ever since records began, ever, across all of North America, ever. I should say the lower 48. So put that in perspective for a second. It's the coldest ever recorded ever in history, ever in the United States for a wind chill temperature. We're talking about changes coming into a cooler period here, ushered in by light reflecting particles of the mesospheric ice crystal clouds. Water vapor, 10% increase. So think about if you had a greenhouse and then you suddenly misted in 10% more moisture in the air and you misted it in, would you notice the particles floating in the air if they were really fine water droplets that somebody misted it and added? So you take a humidity reading and let's say it's 62%, okay, you're going to add 6.2% more into the room of water vapor. Like, would it be noticeable in the air? Would you feel it? Would it have a texture that it's in the air, that it's starting to coalesce on things? All in one go. That's what just happened. So you start to look for signs also. Another one is the southern hemisphere, the ozone hole, if anybody's familiar with the Antarctic ozone hole. The Antarctic sea ice is at the lowest ever recorded. And, you know, it goes high and low and it's in a cycle itself, but this literally dropped off a cliff because the UVB, the ozone is being destroyed so quickly down there that the ozone hole has expanded, and the amount of UVB radiation reaching the ice is astronomical. So it's onsetting with a huge amount of ice melt and evaporation in rapid, super quick fashion. But in the inverse, the continent of Antarctica on the landmass, on the ice sheet, is gaining record amounts of snow and ice. The interesting thing about Antarctica, it's basically a ice desert. It's very, very, very dry there. It's one of the driest places on the planet in certain sections of Antarctica. Drier than Saudi Arabia, equivalent. But it's just dry on ice, not dry on sand. But those places are receiving record rainfall. So you have to think that that whole climate system in the southern hemisphere being disrupted so quickly in a matter of a year, going from stable climate to catastrophic runaway, and I would say runaway ice loss, but not because of man-made conditions. I'm saying because of so much mesospheric ice crystals up there that there's so much breakdown of the ozone on the ice crystal surfaces. Chlorine and bromine breaks down the ozone, but it needs a surface. Ice crystals are that surface where this reaction happens. This catalyst occurs on those surfaces. It's the most ice crystal clouds in the mesosphere ever recorded, apparently ever. It's one of the driest layers of our atmosphere. And the amount of water that went up there took it from one of the driest layers of the atmosphere to equivalent with some of the lower layers. That's insane. So the amount of ozone is going to rapidly break down so fast, they're not going to be able to explain it at the end of the year. August, September, October, November is when you're looking for this 4-month event to happen. It is going to shock and awe the scientific community. But at the same time, that UVB damages crops. I did a whole report on this in the Opportunity Report talking about the barley losses in which areas and which continent based on the UVB danger zone that was in. I mean, there's so many things going on well beyond, anything that we've talked about. Now we're getting onto the planetary scale of a full disruption of a full hemisphere of food growing ability, climate systems, precipitation patterns. And then all of a sudden, in this same week, New Zealand receives 12 times more rain than its all-time record rain in a single event. Same with the Mount Washington. It's the record coldest ever recorded ever in American lower 48 ever since records began ever. We're starting to see these clouds in different places out of season to see the polar stratospheric clouds. Again, it requires extremely low temperatures and a huge amount of precipitation for those to occur. And they're seeing it as far south as like Holland. So this is all the way over the northern hemisphere now. It is a global event. It is from pole to pole, but more centered obviously in the southern hemisphere. But what could we expect with a year without a summer? Well, the northeast U.S. would get bone-chilling cold and they would lose crops and it would snow in July and late June. Is this record coldest wind chill recorded in that same northeast area where the year without a summer completely destroyed crops for a full season? It matches up timeline-wise. It matches up location-wise. It matches up temperature-wise. It matches up volcanic aftermath and after effect-wise. I don't know, Ransom. There's so much happening. It's almost head spinning to try to take it all in, the grandness of everything that you spoke about, especially the production of the civilization here is coming to a halt. anything for humankind that's being produced is coming to a halt. In addition to all these natural forces off planet and terrestrially on our planet, we are definitely at the edge of something, and we're going to talk more about this when we come back. Ransom's going to bring us into the next hour. Anyway, David DuByne, Ransom, Godwin here. Please join us for the second hour. We're going to give you a little information on how to prepare moving through the next 5 minutes. I wanted to talk about hand-cranked radios for just a second because I think they're incredibly important. I myself, I did hours and hours of research on the best hand-cranked radio that could also be a phone charger, emergency light, be able to listen to radio stations, the NOAA weather station in case something happened and you were power out, you could still know what the weather was coming. I personally own this one, the Eaton Red Cross FRX3. It's all hand cranked and there's a small solar panel on top of it. So it's multiple options for recharging, including plug-in. So if something were to happen, hand cranking is the next best option. I would love solar, but it might be a cloudy day. You might be inside a house, but you're going to have to create the power somehow. You hand crank it and ergonomically it slides right in like a book on a bookshelf. I can't believe how long the battery charge lasts on this thing. Even if you leave it up somewhere, like I say, on a bookshelf or in a closet for 6 months, it still has almost a full charge after that period of time.
These crank lights and radios are a must-have. The fact is, if you live anywhere where there's going to be weather, you're going to want to know what's going on. You're going to want to be able to see. And not only that, you're going to want to be able to charge your devices so that you can communicate if the power is out. This is something that you should have if you live anywhere where there's tornadoes, hurricanes, blizzards, etc. It's not whether or not the power is going to go out. It's just when you know that's going to happen. So these are something that you should have handy with you in your car and your backpack. 2 or 3 of them actually would be a good thing to have in several places so that you know that you're going to be able to have light. You're going to have information and maybe communication. Those are 3 main things that you need. And plus, it's cool. You can listen to the radio, which makes the time go by if you're waiting for anything, waiting for the power to come back on. You're going to want to keep your mind occupied, and you're going to want to be able to see what you're doing and also be able to communicate if there is the ability to communicate. And you don't want your devices to be dead when that happens.
In an emergency, you would know where people were moving to. For example, out here in East Tennessee, we have massive wildfires sometimes, and they'll be on the radio broadcasting exactly where the fires are moving. And this is off of what you consider like your AM, FM channels that you would get on your car radio. It depends on which frequency that they're using for that, but they will absolutely tell you where emergency resources are stationed. So if you have to abandon your car, you could be able to get to another place as long as you know the roads or you might have a map. You'll be able to get to some help or main roads where there's emergency vehicles transiting up and down there. Have this on the go that it's be able to put it in your hand and still listen to something. It's very lightweight as well. What happens with your communications or even listening to something to be able to understand what's going on in the environment around you? And that's the key to surviving. And Ransom, I know you said this a few times, is understanding your environment, being able to manipulate your environment and being able to move through that environment to get yourself to safety, to reassess the situation.
Not only that, this is one of the cheapest ways to have insurance so that, whatever happens, if you're on the move, if you have to grab your bag and go, or if you're just at home trapped when the power's out, not only do you know what's going on, but you know if the situation is going to worsen. Imagine all those people that were in several of the different hurricanes that we've had the last couple of years where the power was out. There were a lot of people that didn't know that was coming, and unfortunately they're no longer with us. But I'm sure that people that were prepared and had some radio, they knew where to go. They knew where the relief aid was going to be. They knew which directions the storms were coming, and they knew which directions the water was coming from. So this is a must-have for anybody that wants to know what's going on, and also just having the light.
And you can click on the link in the description box below. And remember, any purchase that you make with the links, whether it be through the podcast in the description box or on the videos across the multiple platforms after we stream, helps us keep this type of information and this show on air so we can continue to bring information and share this information so then you can share with others. And this is truly how it's going to be, is sharing of information, forming communities, and have others that also have some of the same information so we can work as a group versus being on your own alone. That's going to make a huge world of difference, sharing information in communities.
If you wanted to start prepping and taking it serious to get some of these very inexpensive tools that are necessities, why not be prepared for what might happen? Click some of the links, help yourself.
If you appreciate this type of information, click on that link in the description box below. Support our broadcast, our continued mission of bringing you information that can enhance our lives, make our lives more comfortable as we move through this transition. And welcome back for the second hour of mini Ice Age conversations. David DuByne here, right along with Ransom Godwin. First hour, we were talking about how the world has shifted so far, and it seems like all production of civilization kind or mankind is coming to a halt. On purpose, I'm not sure. For a reason, absolutely yes. So the question is, between now and where we're supposedly going, how much will it ultimately come down to and then stop? Because there'll always have to be some manufacturing continuing on the planet. It can't go to total zero because those that are in positions of governmental power trying to make money would not make money, so they will never let it go to zero. There's always got to be some handout and some pocket lining going on, so nothing will ever go to zero. Just like I saw the savings rate for Americans is down to 3.21%. That's it. It was up around 33% during COVID of people had excess money in their bank, and each month they would add money to their account. But that's 3% of people are adding money to their accounts or have money in their account in a savings account. Go figure. That will never go to zero either, because there's always going to be people with money. You should have that mantra, I always have money. There's always going to be people that always have money that will never go to zero. Make that your new mantra. I always have money. Always. That mind frame will change something, the way frequency resonates, and you are in the cosmic soup, for a better term. Make whatever mantra that you need to bend and morph and move through these changes. So what would be some other mantras? You know, everybody listening out there, how about something with safety? Something with family, something with friendship, something with spirituality, something with divinity. There's many aspects that need this fortification of thought as we move through these times. And this whole PSYOP thing that's going on, where the news and the events around us are being used to bend our reality against ourselves, not for the betterment of us, humanity, humankind, but to the detriment of it. And the way all these things are structured now from the social media, and, you know, Ransom, you mentioned Chat GPT and how many companies, corporations are using that not only in script writing, article writing, story writing, press release writing, speech writing, whatever it could be. That's the next, where people are just going to forget how to think. They're just going to plug it into that. So if you consider free speech something that you want to hear and continue for Ransom and I to be able to speak about, talk about, and discuss, think about Revolution Radio right here. Consider a donation right in the donation tab, right at the top above the fold. Keep your running costs, production costs moving so we can continue to bring you valuable information, because it's going to be about community sharing information also. That's truly the way. So you're going to want information flow. That's the whole thing. So if you support this type, please consider a donation, Revolution Radio, to keep it on air. Ham radios, people want to have those during power outages and different disruptions in systems, CB radio, even a GFS or, family handheld. How about the Motorola walkie-talkies that you see out on job sites? Those go 3 miles. You could use those. Be better to communicate further afield and be able to get different points of view. Because if it was grid down and this was on here, Revolution Radio, and you were able to pull that off of any kind of device and listen to it 24 hours, this thing would be on 24 hours because it could continue to broadcast information. And you would be tuned in wherever you could get info. If everything's down and you're not getting any TV signals and you got nothing coming in the house except your ham and your AM, FM radios and whatever you can plug into to grab a signal. And then Elon Musk's, Starlink comes to mind as well. Now it's moving over to Chat GPT, and you got to have Starlink because if all these terrestrial systems go down, if you could create your own power and you had Starlink, you could be the purveyor of information and you would be the hub of information outflow because very few people have that. And being able to have ham and the different kind of devices. And I know a guy who actually has his general operator license who can use, I think he's down like 10 meter band where he's bouncing things off the ionosphere going over to the other side of the planet. You're going to want that kind of information where you can talk across the planet and learn what's going on across the planet, literally. But you just need the right equipment for that. Because this system shutdown seems to be very well choreographed. Very well choreographed. Excuse me, that was my phone notification there. Heard the neighbor out there. Must be coyotes out tonight because I heard some sounds over that way. A couple loud booms. So, okay. Buddy of mine just said, this is interesting on the fly here. Speaking of getting prepped out, my buddy writes some interesting stuff at this estate sale coming up this weekend. So knowing how expensive nails and screws are, I try to go to estate sales because every estate sale, there's always a garage with stuff, like grandpa's stuff in there. There's always tons of nails and screws and that sort of thing that are just laying around in jars. Sometimes they're the same size, maybe not. They might be all just lumped in one box or one can, like an old coffee can. It's a popular way to keep stuff. Old like spaghetti sauce jars and just glass jars, all kinds of stuff, just huge amounts of stuff. But you're talking $400 or $500 worth of screws and nails for like $20 out of these estate sales. And the tools, there's different kind of metallurgy in the tools from the 1960s until today's tools. Like you can replace the handles, but that hard metal, that really hard carbon metal that they use, carbon steel, for the metals, it was really well constructed, very tough, meant to last a lifetime type of tools. Not the junk you get today when you put too much pressure on it, the handle snaps off. Not meant to do that. But anyway, going to the estate sales is a great way to get things that you might need. Tools. We're looking for some sheets right now because we know that like last year, we're probably going to get all of our fruit trees that have blossoms on them. And then there'll be a super freeze that'll come in and it'll wipe all the blossoms and we'll get zero fruit. So this year we're buying a ton of sheets, bed sheets, to put over the trees when that happens. So for us, we're looking at it at different ways to pick up things that we need way cheap because we could buy row cloth, but that stuff's expensive and harder to find these days. Or you could go to an estate sale and buy 100 yards of sheets and things for nothing. And then you could custom cut it to the, bushes that you're going to use or the plant rows that you're going to use. You got to think of innovative ways. And I like going to these estate sales too, because then I look into the past. So I live out in farming country out here in East Tennessee, and a lot of these estate sales are at old farms. And to be able to go into these places where you'd never, ever be able to visit another person's property that deeply in there, to look at the barns. Like these guys all have barns. They don't even have nails in them. They notched all the barns to put them together. And then what's in there and the shelving and just everybody out here, these farms with the estate sales are so, you get lost for days and days and days on just the stuff that they had just to upkeep the farm themselves. Everything, a full mechanic working shop in addition to welding and everything in between, metallurgy, anvil, everything that they needed to keep the farm going by themselves. That's where I see it moving back to again. But when I go to these estate sales and I look and I see the gargantuan amount of gear that they had just for the rudimentaries. They had a full barn full of stuff for just everyday rudimentary living and repair. That's crazy, because I know I don't have that much gear, and I sure don't have welding equipment and that sort of anvils and presses and things to cut metal and bend metal. I don't have all that, but that's what just a regular farm had. But I can get a glimpse on how they lived and what the amount of stuff in the house, what types of, was it oil? Because I've been to a few estate sales where they were using oil burning lamps. They still had from the family oil burning lamps. Like that's before electricity kind. That was in that house. So there's going to be a lot of changes. But Ken, the question would probably be to start the episode. I know I rambled here just for the intro, and Ransom, I said you were going to do the intro, and I stole your intro. My bad. It's really how much can people change? I mean, yeah, an earthquake comes, the earth opens and swallows you up. That's one thing. But truly, like, how much can people change, do you think, to the new way of life? And could they get used to it enough to be comfortable enough to be happy in that new way of life? Because I really think we're getting pulled back to somewhere like 1860, pioneering lifestyle days is the best way I could describe where I think we're going to end up. I think we're going to end up there. So Ransom, welcome back to the second hour. Thanks for joining again.
Yeah, you were painting a picture there, so I almost forgot I was doing a show with you, because I was thinking about all of those goodies that would be in these estate sales like that. I myself do the same thing. I have buckets and buckets of old school electronic wires for the whole older style of stuff. I have buckets of nuts and bolts, and we pick up all the nails and try to reuse them if they're usable, and that's just on a little tiny scale. I know a lot of the farms used to do that too, and there's tools in there that are nothing like today. And not only that, the way that they used them, if you didn't know how to use them, some of them it's funny because you could sit there and wonder what it's for a while trying to figure it out. If you're tool savvy, you probably figure out what it's for. But if you didn't, it would just be like a foreign piece of metal. Like, what do you do with this? Because you didn't know how. So on top of all those tools, you would have to have lots of books. And unfortunately, before we got to a more pioneering time, I think it would be like a Wild West time, for just a little while resettling. And how quick could you get used to situation changing? Well, if you've been planning on the situation for a while, just as a given that it's going to happen eventually, or it could happen, and you don't want to be, caught off guard, you'd start preparing. You have all this stuff. I was thinking about that too with the Mayans when they were living in their cities. Did they have go bags? Did they know where to go get the water, or was it just a big, crazy, confused time where people were trying to leave because bad things were happening? Because people were panicking because there was no food, and rumors of war, and it hadn't rained in a long time, and all of these different things were happening. You can imagine the same scenarios today. The lights just go out where you live. Okay, well, that's not a big deal because, you got a flashlight and you got this. But then it goes into weeks. What happens in weeks? Well, obviously, there's no refrigeration anymore, and people are going nuts. Now, could this happen? Because, when we were talking about the sun doing its thing, and there's always a possibility that it won't be a volcano or comet or an earthquake or a hurricane that does you in. It could be everybody at once with either a created EMP or a natural one from the sun that just puts everybody out for years. And this would be real similar to the situation in 536. And as far as civilization would change on a dime and have to be adapted to within the same exact year. Of course, there would be some safety nets in society, but they won't last long. And then it becomes a madhouse. And then, a big portion of the population just disappears after some time. But then at the end of that, of course, you would have that more pioneering time where if you thought ahead and you had tools, and you knew nature around you, and you knew how to farm in difficult circumstances because you prepared for the idea that there might be little or no water. So that would, depending on where you live, I'm sure if you lived anywhere east of the Mississippi, you probably wouldn't have a problem with water unless it was contaminated for one reason or another. And when you think about these EMP situations, you don't just think about the power being turned off, people starving, and stuff like that, but also all of these chemical plants, nuclear plants, and things like that are going to go offline. And when that happens, more and more area is unaccessible and unavailable to live in. So depending on where you live, you may have to move. I used to live in Russellville, Arkansas, and I knew a guy that worked at the nuke plant there. And he used to joke with me about the little alarm that goes off. I think it's every Tuesday at noon to test. He told me if you hear that sound and it's a real alarm, you're already dead. If you lived outside of that, you could probably take off because you heard it on the news in time. But if you're right there within that critical area, when that thing, has an issue, it's not a good sign. So, think about where you live also. Luckily, I don't think I live near one of those that could affect me. I'm kind of remote in the desert, but there's other situations that would arise depending on where you live. Like you live in a more, rural area, probably with a lot of trees and a lot of bushes and stuff like that. So you're going to be able to fall back somewhat on the land. But at the same time, it's hard to see people coming in those environments versus like if you had a spot set up in the Southwest, you might be in a position where you could see whatever's coming at you. But then again, you may have major problems on having enough water to grow food. So how long would these situations last is another question. How long would it take you to adapt? But not only that, how long could it potentially last? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And what would you do? Like some people are just like, whatever, that's too hard for them to think about these kind of scenarios. But I think people should, because obviously these scenarios have happened over and over and over again to human civilization, where basically one day comes along and then everything is changed forever and it's a new circumstance. So if you didn't prepare for anything, of course, you're going to be lost soon. But at least if you prepared for a random amount of things, like what are you going to eat for the next couple of weeks? Where are you going to go? Where's it safe to go? What can you bring? How are you going to protect it? And then cover your four, main topics. You're going to have light. You're going to have fire. You're going to have food, water, and shelter of some kind to survive. And that doesn't even count the protection that you would need. But thank God we live in one of the continents that are full of ways to protect yourself, set up by our founders, even though it seems like there is an agenda to dismantle that right before whatever event is going to happen happens.
And then it happens. Timeline, probably 4 years of just solid, you're going to be on your own. But then after that, things should start to shift back. Because, you have transferred in a lot of information about history through ancient ages down to more modern age, say since the Roman era type of timeline. It seems that these events, they'll last 4 or 5 years, but then it'll come out. There's no event that's ever lasted forever. And they rarely last, A decade would be an extremely prolonged event. And generally, it's, let's say even 5 years. But you got to put your mind frame to that. 5 years, sheesh, okay. That's a long time. And we're not even into what would be considered, catastrophic breakdown phase yet. We're just entering into the disruption phase. Here in the States, we have it much better than many other places across the planet. So as I was saying, I was talking to somebody in dairy industry, and they were telling me it's the worst famine or the worst food crisis is beginning in Africa ever at the moment. And I thought, well, that's just another sign, like their way of life and also their production for their civilization is coming to a halt. Like even in Africa, which is already, well, not the most industrialized, whatever was on that way to making the place much more industrialized and bringing up the ability or just the per capita of everybody there. ability to live better lives and have more comforts around, that is being completely halted as well. So it doesn't matter where it sits on the development scale, developing nations, first world nations, it's all grinding to a halt. So some of these nations that are just recently within not even one generation, even in the same generation, have gone from abject poverty into suddenly there was a hydro dam or there was some kind of project that brought electricity, and wow, they don't have to, they don't have to go walk 3 miles to go get water anymore, and they got a roof over their head, there's security, food grows reliably. They could go back to the old way when it was more difficult than most people having to do it that never done it. Like to flip in and out of that. Maybe all that backpacking and traveling has helped me through life to really, I could pick up and go. And for me, it is scary, leaving the last pullback position, but going out to be able to venture out because you had to is not as scary for me as it would for many, many people. If it all came back down to it and I had to pull up in my backpack and literally drop the keys on the table and walk away, I could do that. Literally could. And getting momentum and prepared for that too mentally. But traveling and live in different countries, that I've done that before. So as scary as as it sounds that all these changes are here, are we going to become hunter-gatherers again, nomadic peoples? At some point, imagine if you had to become nomadic to survive, and that was the only way you could do it. Like just that transition of becoming nomadic, even if you're with other people that will guide you during the seasons of where to go, where the food would be, where the hunt would be, where come back and rest, relax during the summer. Bountiful gardens, milk and honey would be wherever those, and you'd have to move through the year to go to these places. Even that would be very too much almost for most people to deal with. Even just that change, even if your lifestyle wasn't so disrupted on the hunter-gatherer where you actually knew the places to go, it would be a pretty big disruption. But imagine if there was no lifestyle quality degradation and you still had to do just that. Migrate by the seasons and always pick up and never have a permanent place as such, except for months, not years, not lifetimes, months. And then you were to move to another place. That's called backpacking in our modern era, Now just take it into the life front here. And where does it take you? How many people are ready to do such things to... Somebody has. We're still here. You got to think it's been how many, 400,000 years or so of us humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, trials and tribulations, ice age entry, ice age exits, cometary bombardments, not dinosaurs, but saber-toothed tigers, close enough, I guess. These type of things. We're still here. And now there's 8 billion. Again. So you really have to wonder how resilient the human race is to be able to get through some of these things. And I don't know if there's going to be an all-encompassing message that sweeps through with this electromagnetic change that's actually encoded from God itself. The vibratory pattern just gets swept through and upgraded in a single moment. Maybe we don't have, a lot of people talk, maybe we won't have to eat as much in a higher vibratory state. Maybe you won't have to drink as much water. Maybe you won't need as much sleep, as much rest. If you didn't, then you wouldn't have to, things that we consider now as must-haves might change. All I know is as we progress through these next, up until October of 2024, this turkey quake was definitely an eye-opener. That we've hit that magnetic field twice with massive repercussions on the planet. And as we swing around here into September, October, early November months, we're going to swing back through it. But this time the magnetic field is going to be way tighter. Jupiter is going to be way closer, and that magnetic anomaly is going to be way stronger. So you can imagine increased quakes. And then it's going to do it again, 3 more cycles as it comes around, ultimately until October of 2024. That's what I'm saying. I don't know if we're going to get the real numbers from the USGS about how powerful the quakes are, because they're going to increase. So imagine if something like that were to happen, that same size 9.0 or 8.0 earthquake here in the United States, directly under a city like Seattle or something, or Tacoma, no, or LA, something like that. San Francisco had a big quake, and yeah, it was in the early 1900s, more than 100 years ago, so it doesn't really resonate. It does, yeah, you can see the pictures of before and after, but it doesn't put it into perspective. Because if you saw today's LA and you saw it collapse like all those buildings did in Turkey, and they told you it was like a 7.5 earthquake, you'd be like, no way, that's impossible. And plus to see mass damage and devastation of a city like that in our own country with our own buildings that we're familiar with that would collapse like that, you would just be shocked. You're like, no way, this is not happening. Like that kind of earthquake activity is going to come rolling through 2 times heavy before we get back to the October lineup here, which is going to be something to behold, something I look forward to, but something that's very frightening at the same time. So, Ransom, I had a few things on the phone here, some articles that I'd been looking through before we came on air here. This is off Zero Hedge, and food shortages are starting to become quite serious all over the planet. Now, there's an egg, the egg prices were going up super high, but there's been a price in the wholesale market on that. So there's been 40% pullback on wholesale prices of eggs. I think the only reason is because everybody started to complain. And instead of having a bunch of people out in front of an office complaining about high food prices, which could become a movement across countries, nations, and world, they chose to, pull back on the pricing. And okay, they're getting angry now. Same with the gasoline. Remember when it was approaching $5 and everybody started, complaining? Suddenly it just came back and it's been holding around $3 again. So you reach these points when government knows that they've gone too far with it and they need to pull back, or else it's going to turn into something else. Now we got food deflation, but at the same time, this is why I'm bringing this up. The food giant Tyson tumbling on their earnings. So with Tyson tumbling on the earnings because of the falling beef, chicken, and pork prices, they could close more factories because there's less demand. They don't have to burn it down. This time they close it because it's an economic choice. It's good for the bottom line. You see how this goes in tandem here? Extract the wealth, let off for a second, consolidate, extract wealth, let off the pressure for a second, consolidate more. Because you cannot tell me that they've come in to this point here where now Tyson wants to close down factories because they're losing money because there's food deflation in America. Are you kidding me? That's crazy. You can't really, with like a straight face, put that article out when in the very next article, the food shortages are running. Yeah, Ransom, this one here, U.S. food giant Tyson tumbles on falling beef chicken prices. Sliding pork demand. Okay, I don't see it as that either, because if beef and these sort of meats that you could stock into the freezer were on sale, I mean, comparatively, you'd buy all you could because the prices have been so high. Can you imagine if the prices suddenly slid down to $2 for a dozen eggs and everybody in their mind is at $7, and it suddenly goes to $2? Do you think people aren't going to buy the eggs? They're going to just sit there and go, no, I one's enough for me. Of course not. Everybody's going to go flying to that, flocking to it, overbuying. Cost me $7, so I'm going to get 4 dozen just because it's the same price as I would have paid for 1 dozen previously. So this whole thing about the demand falling just doesn't make sense either. But if you're going to close up some factories, you're going to have to use U.S. consumer confidence as the ploy to do it this time. And remember last week, Ransom and I also talked about the U.S. corn market about to collapse because Mexico is going to put an embargo and forbid GMO crops, otherwise known as bioengineered crops, from crossing the border into Mexico. Now, if this were to happen, that'd be a catastrophic loss for the farmers. Everybody would take a loss. Like farmers would be so bankrupt so quick, so fast. And if they were able to till it all under in a single season, they wasted everything. They wasted all the inputs, all the fuel, all the seed, herbicides, pesticides, ammonium nitrate, get those fields ready, whatever. Yeah. Anhydrous, I'm sorry. I was thinking old days when you could still get that stuff before McVeigh used it. There'd be a catastrophic collapse in the corn supply. And then they would have to instantly switch to something else, but they already blew all those millions of dollars to get that seed in the field, rent the equipment, like I say, season that field with anhydrous, all the fertilizer 4 times the price now. And if they had to go from, Mexico embargoed all GM crop to a turnaround, they probably couldn't, depending as if it was in the very beginning of the season, perhaps they could. If this news were to be announced in like May, they could still turn the crop in and then turn it over and grow something else like soy or millet or sorghum or I don't know, whatever. Farmer's choice, beets for sugar. That's an ethanol one too. You know, a lot of people think corn is the only thing used for ethanol. Beets, sugar beets are much higher sugar content in the sugar beet than there is in corn. Plus that dent corn, you got to do a lot of chemical process to extract that. That's mainly for like high fructose corn syrup type things. So then there would be another catastrophic excuse why nobody would want the corn. And then all the corn that's sitting on the Mississippi that was delayed because of the low water on the Mississippi unloaded directly onto the banks. And then if there was a geoengineered mega flood along the Mississippi, nobody would really care if it all got washed away because they'd be sitting on a mountain of it that they couldn't sell anyway. So to have all the corn washed away and the grains on the banks of the Mississippi from last year's low water, barges couldn't transit. The farmers would actually be like, cool, let it all wash downstream because then we could actually sell our product again this year. So look at these two things in play just in the United States. It's all encompassing everywhere across the planet. So there's really almost no scenario which is out of the realm of possibility at the moment. And here we go. Britons face $300 fine for burning wood to keep warm. England or the UK is going to spend $1,000 per person on food costs over the one whole year period here. For 2023, basically groceries are going to cost $1,000 more in the UK. And then if you want to heat your home with wood, that'll cost you $300 in fines. And then if you do it again, they get a warrant and they come in and they confiscate your wood stove and you get a fine or go to jail for burning wood. And like, you know, it's one thing to extract wealth from somebody, but it's another thing to extract their ability to stay warm in winter. You know, at that point, you know, the rules of the game kind of change right then. When a government comes up and says, you're forbidden from staying warm in the winter and we'll put you in jail if you try to stay warm. That's a little bit, I don't know, almost everybody with common sense would go, whoa, that is just so far over the line right there, completely over the line. That whatever goes, goes. That's all fair game now because you went way too far over the line. Way too far. Same with distilling. A lot of people like myself would say, hey, why don't you use the 4 shots in the heads that aren't really that tasty, that still have incredibly high proof as rubbing alcohol? I wouldn't drink it. Others I know wouldn't drink it. It's too strong. You don't want that methanol in you anyway. I'm making my own medicine. Government says, oh, you're forbidden from distilling and doing this thing. You can't even make your own medicines. Well, I need that for tinctures because I have wild foraged and I have several plants that I need to put alcohol at least above 100 proof to do my own tinctures. I have a willow bark tree and I have a bunch of willow bark that I need to put in alcohol above 100 proof so I could save that aspirin quality out of the bark of the willow tree, but I need alcohol to do it, and I'm making my own medicine, so you're forbidding me from even stopping my own toothache by using a plant on my own land. That's where it's gone to. You know, at that point, that's way over the line too, like way over the line, so far over the line that you're not even allowed to make your own alcohol, to make tinctures, to make things that'll stop the pain in your body that grow on your own land. We forbid that. You have to get it from the store only. Even though you have the skill to do all that yourself, you still need to go to the store and get it, or else we'll put you behind a bar in a cage like a monkey. That's so far over the line there, too. You know what I mean? Hey, at that point, anything goes. It's going to come down to who has these skills that's going to be able to survive through and carry them through. So look for the next big things, I guess. Ransom, sorry, I'm rambling again. Massive food deflation in America. So a huge amount of businesses will close because of the deflation, and then it'll be instant rocketing hyperinflation after that. I don't know the time frame on it. I don't know how many months this will take to play out, but I can see the act finishing from start to finish. The deflation, the corn market, Mexico working in concert with the United States to cause the massive catastrophic corn collapse. In addition to the can shortage now, you're saying not enough cans. You showed me that article with the aluminum, not enough cans to can food. So everywhere you look, there's going to be all these plant closures. Not going to be fires. It's going to be just business decision closures. And this is where it kind of gets scary, because I think we're at the next huge giant step down phase in halting of production of civilization kind needs. Maybe I'm assessing the situation incorrectly. I don't know. It's getting late.
No, I think you're assessing it just right. And it's not just the cans. And, you can look in any market. There's becoming ever increasing reasons for A, not to eat the food that's coming from the suppliers. And B, it's not there when you go look for it. So like right now, people aren't sweating it too bad because, there's lack of this or lack of that, but they can fill up their cart with these other food-like stuffs. And then when you start talking about a GMO corn shortage, well, that's all the stuff that they filled the aisles with. Basically the breads, the cereals, the junk foods, all of that stuff, chips, candy bars, all of that stuff comes out of that industry. Now, I'm not saying you should be eating that anyway, but you made it some pretty, trippy points there talking about what if we had one of those big earthquakes in the United States? So you were talking West Coast, and that's where everybody kind of, assumes that it would happen. But it's likely that the New Madrid Fault could just pop off a big earthquake after years and years of, holding whatever pressures are in there. And you think about that whole area, and that is not an earthquake proof area, so to speak. So they don't have structural engineering that's created buildings that can withstand, big shocks. So that would be, crazy. But back to the point about hunter-gatherers, like, would we have to go back to being hunter-gatherers? Could you do that? And I wanted to bring up some points. You were talking about, there's always the option for single men or couples basically to just pick up a backpack and go, deal with nature and hang out there. And for people like me, that's actually kind of fun. I go out of my way to do that thing. Not too many people go out into extreme environments, which is basically any environment for the human being if you're cut off from supplies, and just go walking for 20, 30 miles out into the desert or, into the woods for 15, 20 miles, just checking out stuff. Most people, that would tear them up. It literally, physically, they're not ready for it. Mentally, they're not ready for it. Some people are too old. They just couldn't do it. And then you got to think about groups that are in family units, when I was younger, single or in a group of other single people or, fit people, we can go do that. We can go hang out wherever and hang out there for long periods of time, knowing what we know and how to live off the land. But dragging a family along with you might not be something that would be possible. You got toddlers crying. And then the idea of hunter-gatherers, you have to remember that all through history, there's always been hunter-gatherers. The problem is there's always been the takers along with those people. So the people that are producing, the hunters and the gatherers and the farmers, those are the producers. And then you have the takers that will take. And I put to you that that's already happening. We don't have to look into some far-fetched, scenario of earthquakes or hurricanes or comets or volcanoes or power grid down or none of that. It's already happening. And that's by human design, by geopolitical events that have been happening and the systematic destruction of the global food market. You were kind of talking about that. That might be good for Mexico if they were doing it for health reasons. Like we don't want GMO food over here. We're growing the ancient kind of stuff, and we can make our own stuff. Good for Mexico. That would be good for us too if we were doing that. But that's not what we were talking about, really. What we're talking about is the way that they set up industries to be able to fail whenever they just change some kind of factor in it. And like you were saying, if Mexico just stopped the import of all of the other corn from the United States, well, obviously a lot of people would go broke, but that food wasn't going for, not to be cold hearted, but it wasn't going for Americans to eat anyway. So, that would be irrelevant to people as far as being able to get food from the store. However, that's just another indicator that the entire food market is being systematically shut down. Now, I was saying, I put to you that there's already takers, because if you've been watching videos from anywhere in the Western world for the past decade, you would realize that crime is going rampant. People are stealing stuff. They're kidnapping people. Constantly I see probably 10 or 15 videos from like Phoenix or Detroit or Chicago, recently a bunch in Philadelphia, right? And just people brazenly just coming up to people, robbing them, taking their stuff, assaulting them, leaving them on the ground. And guess what? There's no help. The only help coming always just writes a report. So in a sense, we already live in a society like that. The only difference being that the amount of people that would be in the position where they felt like they could take, it would be easier to take because they don't have, would increase by, I don't know how many fold. But think about it. So if any of these scenarios go down, say the dollar fails, say we go to World War III, say the grid fails, a coronal mass ejection, a giant earthquake in the United States, you take your pick of disasters. The time clock starts. The race has begun. The rat eat rat, dog eat dog race has begun. The rat race has begun. There's 350 to 400 million people just in the continental U.S. alone, not counting Canada and Mexico. So start your, timer. It's begun. You're in a rat race with all of those people. All of those people are going to divide into groups: the takers, the hunters, the gatherers, the preppers, the continuity of government people. The corporations are going to pull up whatever resources they can, because you know that the elite and the people that serve the elite are going to be taken care of during this time, because, well, they've planned for this event to happen. They have redundancy plans. They have, armored redoubts down in South America. Just imagine a scenario where 2 or 3 volcanoes, let's say Hawaii, for example, something like 536, one in Iceland, one in, say, Hawaii, one in the U.S., maybe Mount St. Helens or Rainier or something like that, and then a couple pop off in South America, Central America, or Mexico. And then overnight, we're dealing with exactly the same situation that they dealt with in 536, where the entire planet got dark, weather patterns changed, crops stopped growing, or growing to their potential at least. People got sick, plagues went around the world, and entire, governments and empires changed their entire situation, from the flags that they raised to the boundaries of their empire and the way that they worked it. So for you to think as an American or Canadian or, Mexican or wherever you live, that you're in a situation that cannot be rocked or changed by world events is not only naive, it's quite silly. So just imagine yourself as a family unit trying to just go out there with your backpacks and live in nature with no real food supplies, no real shelter, no way to deal with anything. Let me tell you, unfortunately, you're going to be a page in the past of a number of people that perished in that time period. Just like we know, 50 million people dying in the Byzantine Empire there. The plagues going around killing additional millions and millions. And then that's just one area of the planet when that happened. So the naive thought that everything will be okay and you have enough stuff, I don't think you do, because, I'm a prepper. I prep for the future. But when I really look at it, I realize that I'm only looking at 2 or 3 weeks, and then, I better have another plan going. I better have a place to go. I better be able to use some of these techniques, technology, skill sets, and other things and put them into practice, because if you don't, it was kind of no reason to have done it in the first place. So you could buy you all of this stuff, but if you're not learning how to use it or thinking about what you're going to do with it, in my opinion, you're kind of wasting time. And also thinking that you're going to camp on your property if things get extremely bad, I think is kind of naive too. Now, if you have a good spot that's out in a rural area and you have it set up and you deal with your neighbors, then we're talking about the reverse situation, like kind of like the Kiva era in the Southwest, where people started living together. They started building cities and communities and doing things that they hadn't done prior to that in the past, which is working together, farming together, and things like that. And they made it through one of the harshest times there was. And then something else happened, and their civilization disappeared. So to think that our little short-term empires around the planet aren't on the verge of collapse just out of the numbers compared to the empires of the past is naive, I think. So we are going into a time, and they're putting it right in your face. So to think that you shouldn't prepare, or at least consider the possibility that it's already happening and it's already, kind of we're in the death throes of fallen empire. I think that whole thing is naive to think that way.
Yeah, man. Something like that happens, you need to bug out and run. You got a place to stay over here. I would definitely put you up. Get in a luxury yurt with outdoor running shower and toilet and bathroom. Yeah, man. Get the family up this way, because the more hands, the more people know how to grow food and do tasks and repair things, the better it is. It's just going to be a win-win-win across the way. Because I wanted to add in another signal or sign that we're seeing, that I've noticed across the planet here too, with a couple minutes. When we go back to the year 1816, the year without a summer, and this is a relatively modern event that happened. Mount Tambora erupts 1815 on the equator, Indonesia. Well, a year later, in America, the crops failed up in the northeast U.S., and this is exactly the area that just experienced the coldest temperature ever recorded in the lower 48 ever recorded ever in the history of weather in America ever. So you would have to think that the Hunga Tonga eruption was a very different kind of eruption than Mount Tambora was. So the effects would be very different as well. The same event would occur, just in a different flavor, if you will. A year without a summer, but a different flavor. Tambora was mainly ash, dust, sulfur dioxide, particulate, and because it was an above-ground stratovolcano, boom. Mainly what you consider classic ash-emitting volcano. Well, this Hunga Tonga eruption was a different animal altogether. It was mainly water vapor that was released. Now, don't get me wrong, there was still some sulfur dioxide and ash that went up with that. But the amount of water vapor, again, added 10% of total saturated water in our atmosphere. It added 10% in one single day in one event. And that subsequently has just spread out across the planet in the higher to mid reaches of Earth's atmosphere. So you would expect the onset of a year without a summer in the northern hemisphere. So when you see the coldest temperature ever recorded in the same exact area that they had the year without a summer occur last time, in 1816, is kind of a, well, maybe I want to check that box. But here's another one I'll throw at you. If you put in, I'll challenge anybody, year without a summer, temperature, 1816, and go to any search engine, and generally you'll get this map of Europe that pops up. It'll say -3C right over France. There'll be a big dark blue spot right over France. Again, if you feel like looking it up right now to follow along with the temperature, year without a summer, 1816, temperatures, and that's all you need to put in. And the classic of the classic will pop up. It's that European temperature map, 3 degrees Celsius right across, mainly predominantly centered over France, like central France, a little bit down onto the Spanish border, definitely up into the German border, over Italy and over into Slovenia. And you'll see that really cold blue, really densely cold there, drop out of temperatures. Just a quick FYI, a 3 degree to 4 degrees Celsius temperature drop means your crops don't grow there that year. Anything over that 7 degrees Celsius drop that they've seen in northern Brazil, that's why the corn crop's off. Mata Grato, that area there, and further north in Para region, has been up to 5 to 7 degrees Celsius lower than normal because of so much cloud cover, that's going to affect. They're not growing corn there this year. So anyway, I digress. So go to that temperature map that you see, classic blue of European temperatures, and then you could look up this Ransom, this title I'll give you here. Europe experienced record number of hailstorms in 2022 for the second year in a row. Now, this brings me up to the heaviest, densest amounts of hailstorms is in those same exact areas that you're looking at for the Tambora Year Without a Summer temperature reconstruction map from 1816. It's identical. It's identical. I swear to you, it's identical. The heaviest orange and reds, where the hail density and the thickest of the hailstorms occurred, are smack dab in the middle of those 3 degrees Celsius cooling drops. So anywhere it's dark blue is where the heaviest hail events have occurred in the last 2 years, especially this last year. So this year, there were 2,700 more hail reports than 2021. This year, get this, keep this in mind. This year, or I should say last year, 2022, 8,200 large hailstorm reports across Europe. A vast majority of them over France, Italy, Slovenia, and Germany. The same areas that were the cold on that temperature reconstruction map of the Year Without a Summer. So if you swing over to the States and you look at the Northeast, nature's front running our instrumentation by a year or so. I'll say with the same thing. The catastrophic sea ice loss in the southern hemisphere around Antarctica is brought on by the massive rapid increase of UVB radiation coming through the ozone hole. The amount of ozone being destroyed is at such records. It's not even 6 sigma event. It's more like a 50 sigma is what we're talking about in difference of the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere with ice crystals in the mesosphere. 6 sigma events are these like once in 200 year events. We're talking like a 50 sigma event here happened with the amount of ice crystals in the mesosphere. Like the surfaces to break down is going to be 50 times larger than anything that ever recorded that happened in the year 2000 for the ozone. And it is happening so quickly. And the UVB is penetrating, and that's what's melting the ice. But the instruments aren't picking up the ozone hole yet because it really won't come on again. And they don't bother measuring between ozone hole onset seasons. So we really won't get instruments, folks, back down there until August, September, October, November. There might maybe something will flip on a little bit early in July. But for right now, it's, hey, go on holiday, enjoy your margarita on the beach, come back in August and we'll flip some more instruments and look at the ozone again. It's been repairing itself since the year 2000. So it's not really a thing anymore like it was with the chlorofluorocarbons. But I am unequivocally saying the same thing. 2 hemispheres, 2 continents, 2 sets of weather events front running our instrumentation by an onset of good 6 months, 8 months. Looking at this, I'm going to say onset of a year without a summer. Crops being lost in Europe and the United States. Watch that weather pattern bend. Most of the crop losses will be centered over New England states. I can be very specific about this. And you can go back and look at the reports of when it snowed in July in New York. So you can get a good idea of New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, New York. They're going to get slammed. So any crop production up there, you need to subtract out of the American totals. And then you're looking at German production, French production, Slovenian production, Italy production, Italian. And you subtract that completely out. And then they got the war over in Ukraine, and they're not going to be playing anything because this war is amplifying. So start subtracting this, and then, add in the UVB damage from the ozone hole increases all across the southern hemisphere, and you'll start to understand that food's going to get really crazy expensive. And, nature's front running us. Nature's giving us all these signals. Something here is changing. So, Ransom, I'm going to stop rambling, but it's on, man. It's definitely on right now. Okay, maybe he stepped away from the mic for a second. But think about what other signs you're seeing across your areas of the planet. Because what I've noticed is local news that's extreme is reported locally, but it rarely makes outside international or continental news. You know, even, what was that? Death Valley got 5 years worth of rain in a single storm. That made no American news almost, except regionally right there. We didn't hear about that in Tennessee. The only reason I heard about it was going to the Watchers.news and strangesounds.org, these sites, that I was able to find that. Signing off, Dave DuByne, Ransom, Godwin. We'll see you next Thursday. Please leave us some comments. Visit our sponsors. Thank you so much for listening. We're out.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
What the heck is the truth, Jihad? Hey, I'm Kevin Barrett, host of Truth GDO. Federal prosecutors, Department of Homeland Security agents, and curious passersby often ask me, just what is this truth jihad thing anyway? Well, everybody knows what truth is, but jihad is a misunderstood term. Jihad means effort or struggle. The greater jihad is the struggle to be a better person, while the lesser jihad is the struggle to defend the community. Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, did say that the best jihad is a word of truth flung in the face of a tyrant. And that's what we do here at